All right, we are live here with an epic gamer, John Doyle. Great man. Some would say kind of responsible for getting me some subs, but we all know it was all for the working and all for marketing and building some infrastructure. Some things will be said in this podcast that some people might disagree with. Well, I know it might set some alarms off because like the infrastructure's been saying this or that. So a lot of people are going to know what you stand for. But if you want to go on and say a couple like things to just quickly describe yourself, since we are speed running this.
True. I guess I would describe myself as a more authentically right wing conservative, and we use that term quite strictly because so much of what's been going on within the right is basically people who are disaffected liberals trying to uh, kind of walk over into the right wing atmosphere, and we tend to greet them with open arms. And this is where you kind of get into like the lag, so to speak, of where the right is, particularly on social issues, with like the right now is just doing what the left was doing 10 years ago, etc. So when I say authentically right wing, that is said with intentions of gatekeeping, because we don't want liberals, we want true conservatives, and anything from a deviation from that, or anything that is a deviation from that, is going to be ineffective at helping our movement succeed and take back power. So I guess that I would simply define that strain of conservatism as that which conserves the traditional American society, which is a almost ambiguous term intentionally, because so often what we tend to do is we tend to I'm so sorry. Hold on. Bro, my dog is literally about to die. What the?
Is this what 627 is?
Dude, I'm about to be so black-filled. No, is this happening live?
Do you want me to end the broadcast?
No, hold on. We're pulling through. We're literally going to make this. Oh my gosh. Okay. Typically what we tend to do, I think, as conservatives, dude, that's going to be such a rip. Wow. Okay. We're composed. We're back at it. We're stoic. Typically what I think we tend to do as conservatives is we tend to define like conservatism as almost a means that are really ends, or I should say maybe like ends that are means. So like we'll say like conservatism is about things like small government, freedom, the Second Amendment, things that are all supposed to be means to ends, but we tend to think that they are ends in themselves. So the reason I kind of ambiguously define it as whatever conserves the traditional American society is because as conservatives, we understand that we're trying to conserve things, but we also understand that, it's not the 1950s anymore. And so our strategies need to be updated as time continues to conserve that same society in terms of, the metrics we would probably think are the most emblematic of a successful society. This doesn't mean that we're, going to be using 50s or 40s marketing strategies to try to conserve that society. It just means that we know that that is the goal. And so if we have to abandon or adjust certain means to achieve that end, we are more than willing to do so.
And I think that's a really good point. I've especially seen that across like the differentiation between the Rittenhouse trial versus like the Chauvin trial, because very few would stand up for the Chauvin trial simply because who died was black. And we can be pretty much honest that if who Rittenhouse shot in self-defense weren't like three white men, that the right would cower much more than they have already been cowering on that such
This is
issue.
true. I can't say much, I don't think, but
Okay.
I will say that a certain special someone I found out today is actually a big fan of the channel. So that's kind of epic. That was a huge white pill. I spoke with him earlier today, this special individual. But you're totally correct there, because even though the right is willing to kind of jump the gun here and say, Kyle Rittenhouse did nothing wrong, the language kind of almost concedes that if he did something wrong, it's up for debate. Like it's almost, it concedes that it is possible that he did something wrong by saying, he did nothing wrong. So maybe that's just me being hypercritical, but I would prefer that the language were something like Kyle Rittenhouse did everything correctly, or he did everything right, because it's not enough to say, he did nothing wrong. he did everything right, both in terms of morally speaking and then also practically speaking. I mean, the way that he was able to execute and maintain control of the rifle and, put shots on target when it counted, it even basically spare that last guy's life. I mean, the weapon was being held in his right hand. He took out the right hand. It was just so perfectly executed in a way that I don't even know, military people who could pull that off to the same effectiveness that he was able to. And that's not even taking into account the fact that this kid was 17 and had like no prior training. So I really do think it was some form of divine intervention. But yeah, you're totally correct there. It's only because there were 3 white guys that got shot that the right is so willing to come out and defend this, even with something like the Derek Chauvin case. We were all for Blue Lives Matter and they got a tough job and there's just a few bad apples. Derek Chauvin did nothing wrong. Frankly, he did everything. I mean, the guy weighed less than I do. He was a
Yeah.
skinny guy. He had no other choice. And so we were kind of willing to throw him to the wolves there because there was just so much backlash because that video was so perfect in that it looked so incriminating. And the average person was just simply not willing to look at that through a critical lens. And so it made for perfect ammunition for the left. And we basically kind of rolled over on our backs there for that one.
And I think that's a really good pivot point to back the blue, because I made a recent video on that like we had this assertion that it's some conservative force, which I kind of get conceptually, that like sacrificing yourself for the betterment of society to maintain order is conceptually a conservative idea. But what's happening right now is not maintaining order, but following orders. And those orders are largely coming from a state that wants us dead
True.
and wants to see us like put in prison, blood raped, as you saw in that one tweet by that one nasty woman, silly woman, as Trump would say.
A silly woman indeed. Yeah, it's totally true because as we discussed a few minutes ago, like conservatives need to understand that the ends are separate from the means. And so our support for law enforcement is rooted in the fact that we recognize that law and order are, the cornerstones of a just and prosperous society. But we don't really live in that society anymore. And so any allegiance that we would pledge to law enforcement, especially when we can prove anecdotally or even empirically that they're being targeted against us because they exist as the enforcement arm of the state that is now hostile to us quite openly, it's like that framework no longer exists. Like you need to kind of update your OS there because they are openly trying to make people's lives very difficult for espousing beliefs that are anything even sympathetic to right-wing political beliefs.
Yeah, and the very modern right wing, you could say, which is like talking point, which is very adopted in Frankfurt and postmodernist talking points, if we just conceded all ground. But we've talking about like we can just get rid of the state, and what we've seen over like the last summer is that when we try to do, when like people actually try to do that and go against the state, it adapted into this authoritarian, like this tyrannical, shoot, tyrannical anarchist state, to where
Yes.
they will be tyrannical against us, but be anarchic against the people that rule it, with the same
Yeah.
people, like the same people that Rittenhouse shot, the pedophiles, the gun charges, the child rape, like those 3 people. That's why they had the us versus them, because they are those people. They view it
True.
as us, the pedophiles, versus the people that want to defend themselves and want law and order, and they are
Yeah.
using the system to do that.
No, and it's such an important point too, because this kind of gets back to the success of the left in terms of their methodology, because you will never see anybody on the left punch left. But people on the right, our favorite thing to do to virtue signal and tell the left that we're not all that bad is to punch right. And so that concept that you just articulated was, I believe, coined by Samuel Francis in the 1990s. And unfortunately, he's now without I was gonna say he's no longer with us, but I was gonna say he's without life, unfortunately, which I guess is true. But people were willing to cancel that guy because he had some controversial writings on different topics that weren't exactly translating well into the mainstream American dialogue. But that in itself should not negate his other predictions, and he's probably the most accurate in terms of people who 30, 40 years ago were predicting the results manifesting of certain trajectories in right-wing or American politics, more broadly speaking. And so with something like anarcho-tyranny, it's like that is exactly what's happening, because we now have that hostile state, and they can't necessarily be seen being the ones, pulling the triggers or rounding people up, because that is not conducive to maintaining this perception of being a liberal democracy. And so what do? They've got apparatuses that effectively act as paramilitary wings to that state, and those would be, your Antifas, your Black Lives Matter, or what have you. And so they not only enable it, like they literally don't even, I mean, whether it's the FBI, who's not even tracking the violence, or it's cities like Portland just completely yielding and ceding ground to these people, it's like they allow it to happen because they serve the ends that they would like to be done, but that they can't necessarily be seen doing. And that's why on CNN, they'll say Antifa is not a group, it's an idea. AOC will defend Antifa because it's like that is something that they want to see happening, but they don't want to have necessarily the blood on their hands. And so we can't even, I'm not calling for like right-wing violence, but it's like you want to beat these people and you're going to disavow a conservative essayist who ended up being one of the most on point and precise thinkers of the 20th century. And it's like, you can't even say his name anymore in a lot of circles because he had a couple ideas that were controversial, but it's like these people are literally advocating for genocide against right-wing people, and what we're supposed to like shake their hands and debate them at Politicon. I don't think so.
I mean, you can just look at any communist country ever. What happens to the opposition? I mean, if we even look at their like anecdotes or their rhetoric at all, it's like you can kill someone that's inconvenient to you. That's like their abortion rhetoric, and everyone knows that that's a lie. It's not a banana; it's a human. The thing is, they think it's inconvenience. Well, are we not inconvenient to them? Are we not inconvenient to their path towards total totality and a world government?
Yeah, we're completely inconvenienced, and that's what's scary too. It's because they're so godless. Like their entire perception of the world is basically a humanist perspective, and if they can define us as an impediment, a living impediment to their sort of utopian worldview, then that is the language that would be necessary to justify, like, everything that's happened to people like us throughout history when these people take total power. So I'm very skeptical of that. And we're actually, we're going to talk a little bit about that in the upcoming videos, this sort of humanist versus Christian worldview and how that manifests politically throughout history and then also within American politics. So we're excited about that. We're going to get that out this week. The Plan Trusters. We love
Plan Trusters. Okay. And people always ask why we like to, why don't we just beat the Democrats and get in power? I don't see where that's really worked while having like a failing right wing. I mean, if we look at 2016, we had control of the House of Representatives, Congress, Supreme Court, and the presidency. And what did we get? Some minor reductions to Obamacare. Is that what we accomplished? Some minor tax cuts? Is that what we did?
That's if even that, and that has been the case on in terms of literally complete control of the federal government. It's been the case a handful of times in the last 100 years, and I can't think of any lasting right-wing political victory. I mean, every issue we're basically on the back foot of. Even things with like abortion, where we're kind of gaining some momentum recently. Even that, you have to understand, is just digging ourselves out of the hole that was created with something like Roe v. Wade. So. Yeah, I think that that's basically correct. That, if you look at the history in this country in terms of the more modern understanding of like right and left wing politics, we've had a lot of political victories. I think we've even had more control of government than the left has. I think that's correct in terms of like, controlling Congress or controlling the executive branch or whatever. But it's like we don't have the actual policy victories to sort of prove that we were actually even holding the power. Like if you were to show an alien, what this country looks like and kind of where the roots of all these trends have come from, they would probably not believe you if you told them that we had held power for just as much time and actually more time than the left has within the last like 2 centuries.
Especially 21st century, I believe, like when I calculated the margins when I was uploading my last episode, it was like of like a 2/3 margin of victory, but the amount of victory that we've actually had is like 0 out of like 1,000 or something like that.
Yeah, we just don't win. And that's the term that Samuel Francis had for conservatives. He called us beautiful losers, because that's what we are. We lose with grace and our principles and everything, and then we face the wall and we get our brains painted on the wall with an AK-47 or a high point or something in Tetris, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was trying to pull up a tweet I had, and I was going to reference it, but apparently I'm now getting Twitter temporary limited feature, so that's fun. But I was using this analogy that I really liked. And I was like, if we walk down like a bridge and there's railings there that we see, and then the railings break and we fall in the water, we're not going to get mad if the water was there. We're going to get mad if the railings are broken, and we want them repaired. And that's what the right is right now, is that they're saying they're going to defend us. They're saying they're these borders, but they're just collapsing anytime we try to rely on them. and we're getting killed for it.
Yeah, we literally have no representation in government, minus a few exceptional examples. And it's like there's this sentiment on the right that you hear. I mean, I cannot imagine how many times I've heard somebody say, "Well, we just need to rise up. We just need to get those rhinos out." And it's like who they define as rhinos are actually like not rhinos. So it's like on the one hand, they recognize that there are corrupt politicians who claim to be representing them and who aren't actually following through on those promises. But then on the other hand, they don't recognize that the liberal conditioning that has made those Republican representatives so impotent has also bled into their own thought processes to where they're like, no, this guy needs to be more small government. This guy needs to be more free market. And it's like, you don't get it. Like, that's more or less the problem. That type of thinking, because as we've been talking about recently, that is like amoral thinking. That is like almost a relativist mindset to have. And that's not conducive to any tangible or lasting victory.
Yeah, and that's really like one of your videos. I think it was what happens if Trump loses. Whenever you went into the Frankfurt literature, that's really when I started to realize, like, man, the right has really been copying the points of the communists for like the last 100 years, and that's probably why we've been losing. I started understanding that all, and it's really just made a lot of sense once you start reading the literature that we are no different other than people that are just sitting in a corner and desperately crying to have a seat at the table. Like,
Yep.
they are saying, you go sit in the like, we're at the kitchen table. They get mad at us. They say, go sit in the corner for 5 minutes. We sit there and we just sit there and cry and do nothing. And that's what we've been doing.
Yeah, and it's funny because then we like scratch our heads like, well, why can't we just why is everything like this? And why like and we often talk about too, like, you know, what if this country were actually moving in like a more right-wing direction? Like imagine like what that would look like. Like we literally have no point of reference for that because everything has just been deteriorating, both in terms of, you know, social trends, economic trends, not even in like a, you know, more I don't like bureaucracy, but I mean, like the last argument for liberalism was the economic argument, like, oh yeah, you might not have any identity or, you know, preserved culture or heritage or anything, but at least, you know, you're going to get good products at a fair price. And now you look at the consequences of that, and it's like you've got these little you know, journalists writing articles about like why you won't get turkey for Thanksgiving and why that's actually a good thing and things like that. And it's just like there's no argument left. We need to accept that this framework doesn't work, and any idea that you have that has been taught to you by somebody who is operating on talk radio or somebody who goes viral still on Facebook.com. You have to understand that those ideas are still operating within that framework, perhaps more on the edge to give this sort of like pressure release valve illusion of like actually being a threat to the status quo, but it's not. So it makes sense to me that in order to break out of this framework and achieve something more productive, you would have to kind of have ideas that might be a little bit shocking to people, which is why you get so much pushback if you have ideas like we do, because people are like, wait a minute, you're not a conservative. It's like, no, I am. That's the problem. You're not.
Yep. And that's really, like, again, what we've been going through. I mean, if you look at like Pat Buchanan illustrated this very well. I've been reading Day of Reckoning very recently, and it's a very good book. And so far, it's been very surprising as to how good. I mean, I knew his books were good, but it's very, very insightful in how
his writing style is so good. I mean, it really just can't be overstated because his writing style is very unique. It's just so digestible. Like the way that he structures even his paragraphs. I mean, he just really just the brevity of it is something that you don't see in a lot of other right-wing writers. And so, yeah, anybody who hasn't read Buchanan yet, definitely dive into that. There's so many good books by him. You really can't pick a bad one.
Mm-hmm. And it's very intriguing to read it and see like the dynamics of how every country that's collapsed, if we look at like Philippines or all these, or like France, if you look at modern day France, see how it was prior. I mean, France has always gone through trouble, but it wasn't this pickpocketing zone that it now was until they started allowing this like mass non-assimilating base of different religions, different cultures, and different diversity quotas, whatever quota that is, in order to basically collapse the country. And that's what we're having now as we have that come in. We have people coming from Mexico, which about like, I believe the stat was like over 70% view America's history as racist or whatever. And they're coming in and they're saying they're worst and they're rapists and they're monsters. And
True. No, it's true. And it's like you can even see videos of these people because, and the left thinks that they're so cosmopolitan and they're so educated on different cultures, but like they literally cannot conceptualize that people from third world countries do not subscribe to the values that we subscribe to. They only view culture in terms of like the street festival, like food and arts and things that can be commodified. But it's like you can find videos of people in France stealing like people's handbags off of their person or bikes, and they'll be confronted on video, and they'll be like, "You can't take that," and they'll be like, "Why?" "Because it's mine. I want it." Well, and like they're like struggling to articulate to this migrant, like, no, you can't just take people. Like they have no concept of like property rights. These really are like European ideas, and so they just see it and they're like, object, I want object. Solution, I take object. And then if like you have a problem with that, now the problem is like this person's trying to take what I now perceive to be my object. So I'm just gonna beat him in the head with a machete, which does happen more than they would like to admit in those countries now.
Yeah, and you referencing that kind of reminds me of like the typical libertarian response to anything, which is like, well, what if they violate NAP? They can't do that. It violates the NAP.
Yeah,
Well, what if they
exactly.
do? They can't do that. Or what if they violate the Constitution? They can't do that. They're made up by the Constitution. But
Exactly.
what if they do? But they can't do that.
Yeah, you can't violate the Constitution. Why? Because the Constitution says so. The left is kind of right when they say the Constitution is just a piece of paper. It really is. It doesn't mean it's a bad piece of paper that it should be thrown out. But there was somebody at one point who was very intelligent. I forget who, but they said that there's no such thing as a nation of laws. And I think that that is basically correct. I think that whoever is in power is ultimately going to adjust the language of things and selectively enforce other things, and to kind of, make the world, or at least the people over whom they govern, kind of how they want to be. And for a long time in America, it worked out because you had people who actually subscribed to the values that were articulated in the Constitution. But now, as that has become not the case, we are like scratching our heads like, wait a minute, well, what's going on? It's like the Constitution is really just kind of a symptom of the attitudes of the people. The people almost keep the Constitution relevant as opposed to the Constitution keeping like the people's, mentality towards politics relevant, because politics is about people. Politics is basically, as shady as it sounds, politics is about helping your friends and punishing your enemies. It really is that simple. And if we adopted that attitude instead of this sort of like, masturbatory, like politics is about sophistication and being a true statesman and things like that, which it is, but we don't have any real statesmen left. Like the last real American statesman, other than of course Emperor Cheeto, was probably actually Pat Buchanan. Like just a really just this is a guy who, first of all, he's 6'2", Georgetown educated, was the guy who's the only guy smart enough to get out of Watergate without going down. He served in 3 Republican presidential administrations. Like the guy is just a genius. He's just a maverick, and he's just so good. Like that was the guy that could have turned this whole thing around. And then I would say Trump too, because he's got his own sort of resume. But in terms of like, if I had to pick a guy who say they were in their prime to like turn things around, it would definitely be Buchanan. But unfortunately, that ship has more or less sailed, and so now we're basically going all in on President Trump.
Yeah, it's really so true. Like if you want to kill a nation, bring in all the refugees that killed their own nation, the same people that didn't do anything about the regime changes there, weren't fighters. Like if you look at like Hispanics on political scale, they have a far higher traditional value. But if you look at like who's going out to the protest and who's actually mobilizing, it's largely white people as a general rule, because we have a much more, resistant culture, much more, resist blank, whatever. Like we mobilized.
Yeah. White people, if they don't like a state representative, like, making their zoning laws like a little bit weirder, they'll like go vote that guy out for some reason. We're just, we get into that stuff and it's kind of funny, but no, it's totally true. It's like they have that attitude. And again, because we're so conditioned to only ever be able to criticize and notice things about white people, but simultaneously you also can't acknowledge that white people as a group exist. But they'll say, well, I don't like all these white liberals moving from California to my state in Texas. And no, you leave the policies there. And it's like, what do you think is going to happen when you have people coming in from like Honduras and El Salvador and Nigeria and Haiti? Do you think that they're going to leave those Democrat policies at the door? No, they're not. If you can't even assimilate white liberals, how are you going to assimilate, who, by the way, are coming from American states, who speak your language, who generally understand your concept of religion? How are you going to assimilate people who come from literally a different world? You're not. And if you think otherwise, you're retarded.
Yeah, we kind of are retarded. You got two
Yeah.
parties. You got one that's evil, one that's retarded, and you got bipartisanship.
Yes.
And then you
Which
got
that, by the way, too, was a Sam Francis quote, except he said stupid instead of retarded. But I think that that's actually, yeah, that was one of his lines, which was brilliant.
yeah, and it's not even the good kind of like autistic, because like
True.
as the autistic boy expert, some could say, creator of Autistic Boy Autumn, I could say John kind of does fit some of the quotas, and there are some great quotas about like not listening to social cues, you know, ignoring whatever, and just being like, yeah, I am gonna say the N word to someone at probably a casino or something, you know.
Who told you that story?
Uh,
I stand by that story 100%, by the way. John Doyle did nothing wrong. He did everything correctly. Dude, that's funny. That's actually funny. No, but the thing with the autism is like the reason I say you actually have to be a little bit autistic to be successful in right-wing politics is because, first of all, autism is hypermasculine. That's number one. There's literally a correlation between prenatal hormone exposure, like with testosterone, and the likelihood of developing autism. And when you think about what autism is, it's like literally, you know, hyperintelligence and then being socially retarded. And that's kind of like masculine. You know, there is something to be said about being charismatic, but it's almost like an ignorance of the social cues. And the reason that's so important now is because everything is so inverted that you kind of have to recognize that and then choose to ignore it, which, you know, you could argue is autistic, which is funny. But another thing that's so important about it is really like the fixation. It's like we are so fixated on this mission that is so impossible, and that we don't really have like an idea of how we're going to pull it off, but it doesn't matter because we believe that we can. And it's that fixation. It's not about image, it's not about money, it's not about masturbating to this idea of like, you know, this sort of sophisticated political class. It's not about that. It is about helping our friends and punishing our enemies, basically,
and making Attack on Titan intros as a sitting congressman.
It is that fixation that cannot be bought and it cannot be co-opted, which is so necessary for a successful movement. Every successful political movement in the history of the world has been run by autists. This is a fact, but yet so few will take it into account. But when you think about it, it actually is true.
Makes sense to me. Makes sense to me.
Elaborate? No. No, I don't think I will actually.
What great leaders listen to people and social cues? What great leaders do that? I don't know.
You can't, because if you literally, to change the culture, you have to ignore the social cues of the culture. You have to be autistic. I wouldn't trust anybody who wasn't autistic, actually.
That's actually a great point.
Yeah.
I do got to ask John, what happened on 6/27?
6/27. Wait, let me check my calendar. Hold on. I don't know if that's the date that I think it is.
I think it is.
Okay, all right. What is this? Do you know what happened on?
I know a bit.
These people, you know, it's you tell a couple people a couple jokes, and then all of a sudden these anti-John Doyle disinformation campaigns, they spread like wildfire.
I thought you'd never ignore a question. That's what I've been told.
I answered the question. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that happened on 6/27.
Okay. All right, so I think we're gonna wrap up soon, but just get some short things in before you have to go. As far as content uploading, where is the process coming on that?
We talked about this extensively in the Discord last night during the AMA, but basically there's just so many moving pieces right now behind the scenes. Like even this week in particular, I mentioned to you earlier, I've got like 2 speaking events that we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And then this video, the Satanism Liberalism video, has actually turned out to be the most like dense video, both in terms of like, you know, I think the the thoroughness of it, but also the length of it since actually the anti-pornography dissertation. I think that this video is going to be about an hour long. So once that's out, I've got a bunch of other stuff outlined already, so it should be pretty consistent after that. But I think that this has been a pretty it's been like difficult to do this video the same way it was difficult to do the anti-pornography video, which I unironically think is because of like demonic influence. I think that the same way that it took a while for me to get that anti-pornography video out because, you know, I couldn't get my thoughts clear or I didn't feel motivated. I think that was literally because like demonic forces recognized that that was going to be a significant attack on their ability to control the minds of young men, the same way how this upcoming video is going to be a very significant attack on how, you know, Satan is able to operate so effectively within contemporary American politics. And, you know, at least 100,000 people are going to see it. So I think that that's probably why I've been a little bit more black pilled recently. So after that hill is overcome, I think that we'll be relatively smooth sailing from there.
An interesting point, Rep. That's a great
I'm not
point.
uploading because of demonic influence. This is literally the case. I wouldn't expect an East Orthodox to understand, but this is literally the case.
Interesting. Would you want to elaborate on the East Orthodox complex versus the Roman Catholic?
No.
Okay, great question. This is an important point. Will the sun ever set on Vince Dow nationalism?
I don't want to talk about Vince Dow. I'm going to beat the crap out of that kid.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna let you off here. Got the shirts. We're gonna pull up the shirts. Heck yeah.
So true.
So true.
You know what's so funny about George Floyd conservatism or George Floyd in general? At least with Trayvon, you know, they could kind of paint him out to be like this little boy, but George Floyd's like literally just a black guy. Like he's literally just a black guy. It's so funny.
It's very funny. Very funny.
True.
You know, we kind of are like George Floyd right now, except we are killing ourselves. We are getting kneeled on by the state. We are the person on the side of the road who can't.
We are the real
George
live. Floyd.
We are the real George Floyd.
It's true. You know? Yeah, cons are the real George Floyd. It's
That's
true. It really is true. It's an excellent point.
And the Democrats are the real conservatives. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, Democrats were the real social conservatives. I remember that. Dude, stupid Trump's kids, man. Ivanka, what are we gonna do with you?
Make her mind cobalt or something. I don't know.
Yeah, true.
Send her in front of the. Put her in the military. This is the only time it's okay. We're gonna put her in the military. We're gonna put her at the front lines. All right, and then we'll go from there.
Sounds good. I'll follow you. I'll take your orders. You sound like you got it all figured out.
All right, we're gonna end it here. You can go check on your dog or whatever was happening there.
We are like literally so black-pilled. I don't even want to talk about that. We're down bad boys, but it's okay. It is okay. Everything's fine. Right.
Prayers for you, King.
So true. Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
All right. I'm just gonna talk a bit before we end this stream. You can leave, John, if you want to. I am now uploading to Spotify. This will soon be up to Spotify. I have created a RSS account to have this on Spotify, and we are going to have that. So if you are now seeing this on Spotify, I do have a YouTube that this will be on. It's youtube.com/Carter Shaw. I hope everyone enjoys their nights. I'm glad I get to upload. Finally having this done. Originally it was supposed to be longer, but then John has some things because he might be actually uploading apparently. So that's epic. That's epic. He just has to conquer the demonic influence and elaborate on why women doing squats is satanic, because women doing squats is pretty satanic, as many say. Let's go through some chats before we end this. He did avoid the 627 question. That's a great point. This is true. Satan did. That's true. State. Didgeridoo. How many times do I have to keep you from asking that? Yeah, I'm gonna have to fix this Twitter thing because apparently I'm now gonna have to enter my Twitter phone number for Twitter or something. It's just retarded. I'm probably not gonna actually put my phone number. I'll make up something or something. I don't know. But we're gonna end this off here. Great content. Glad to have everyone. I will be uploading soon. We're gonna be posting a video soon on big Nick clips I've had. Then we're gonna be uploading Sped Gang 2 bloopers. I'm gonna begin the process of Sped Gang 3. We're also working on a video on Rittenhouse and the us versus them mentality that has cultivated this anarcho-tyranny state and how this has led to our defeat. I originally planned on elaborating on this episode more, but fortunately that couldn't happen because of time's sake. So Sped Gang 3 is coming, that's true. It's going to be high production, actually, unlike the other ones. The other ones are kind of esoteric in the sense of being like actually autistic, but this is actually going to be kind of high production, but still autistic. And that's going to be epic and based and gamer. So I hope everyone has a good night. 07's in chat. Love you guys. I'm going to get to uploading soon. Hopefully he gets uploading soon. Maybe Rep might have to upload some more. Maybe he has to go to 13 uploads and then John will upload. Maybe that's the case. We'll see. Watch out for 627 and have a good night.